Nearly 200 million people had mental disorders in India, according to the Lancet report published in 2019. How can we make mental health services more accessible and affordable for all? How can we make mental health a universal human right? I'm Ambika Singh Kama, and on this World Mental Health Day special broadcast, I'm joined by Dr. Pratima Murthy, Director and Senior Professor of Psychiatry at NIMHANS. Thank you so much, Dr. Murthy, for giving us your time and joining us today. We would like to tell our viewers who are watching this, please post your questions regarding this important issue, and during the course of this interview, we will take up these questions with Dr. Murthy. So the first question, Dr. Murthy, which I would like to ask you is, could you share some numbers on the mental health burden in India to just set the context of how serious is the situation and why it needs to be a focus area in our goal to building a healthy nation?
Thank you very much, Ambika, for asking me to talk on this very, very important topic. First of all, I think it's very important to recognize that mental health just doesn't mean the absence of mental disorder. But just like good physical health, we must talk about good mental health. But at the same time, what you've raised in terms of the burden of mental illness is something that is alarming the world over. World over, we know about 15% of global disease burden is due to mental illness. In India, we know that somewhere between 1 to 7 and 1 to 10 people have some kind of diagnosable mental disorder. And this, in terms of numbers, is a very, very huge number of people who are suffering from mental disorders. We know that the most common mental disorders are depression and anxiety, but there are also serious mental disorders like schizophrenia, psychosis, bipolar mood disorders, which, although the prevalence might be lower, is associated with a lot of disability. In fact, we also know that people with severe mental illness are likely to die 10 to 15 years as compared to the normal population. It's also very important to know that there are diseases which may not be very common but are associated with very severe disability. And therefore, for every person who has a diagnosable mental disorder, it's also important to know that there are 6 to 7 times of people who have various kinds of psychological distress, who rarely are recognized. They rarely recognize it themselves, others don't recognize it, and therefore the burden of mental illness is huge. And of course, during COVID, globally as well as in our country, we know that there's been a huge increase in mental health problems, and therefore it's very important to take it very seriously.
Absolutely. And I think the point you said here, about it's not just absence of mental disease or a problem, but it's also having good mental health like physical health. I think that's a very important point. Dr. Murthy, we have been seeing a rise in deaths by suicide amongst the youngsters, students. What do you think are the possible reasons, and what are some of the signs and symptoms that family members, teachers, and friends need to look out for?
There are several risks as far as suicide attempts among teenagers go, and it's very important to understand those risks. These include a family history, because we do know that at least a part of this kind of behavior can be associated with a family history of this kind of problem, as well as mental illness. Exposure to violence early in life, continuing exposure to violence, a high degree of impulsivity, a difficulty in managing their emotions. We call them very severe disruptive behaviors, access to easy methods of harming themselves, being exposed to extreme degrees of bullying, or maybe at school. Finally, feeling very hopeless and helpless and feeling that there is no way out can all be risk factors for a person to believe that suicide is the only way that is apparent to them. And it's important to recognize all these. And therefore, it's important to recognize cries for help, especially from younger people. And this might be manifested, in becoming very withdrawn, detached from others, not eating well, not sleeping well, using substances, frequent bodily complaints, a decline in their academic as well as extracurricular activities, talking about not wanting to live. And I think both parents, teachers, friends, family, all of us need to be aware of these kind of signs and make sure we help young people through their difficulties so that they don't look at this as an option, which invariably, as I mentioned earlier, is only a sign of desperation. In fact, there are lots of people who have told us once, they attempted this, that they wish they hadn't. And that's why it's important not to allow people to get to this point where alternatives don't seem to appear.
So start helping right from the beginning, from recognizing. I think awareness, of course, here is key. Ma'am, we have a first viewer question. Bagish Kumar is asking, Ma'am, I'm preparing for a competitive exam and I've been feeling surrounded by overthinking and negative thoughts for the past few months. Please guide.
I think the most important point, of course, is not to let examinations be the end all and be all of your life, but to make sure that you have prepared for it, that you feel, that means, not just doing a last minute prep, being able to, work at it continuously, but also to remember that while you do that, adequate sleep, eating well, being able to calm yourself so that you can write your examination in a more calm state of mind is very critical. And finally, I think the result of the examination, putting in your best, is important, but also to remember the result of the examination is not a complete, indication of your ability or not, because some of us are able to do it in the first shot, some of us may not, especially if there are competitive examinations with high cutoffs, you may not be able to. So therefore, not being completely devastated by the result and preparing yourself for the eventual outcomes is also very critical, while of course you must hope and aspire to do the best.
Well, I think that answers that really well for Bagish, because he is giving a competitive exam. The next question, before I have my set of questions as well, but the next question we'll take, a YouTube channel with the name IndoFacts wants to know how to deal with the forced academic pressure from parents. Even 90% doesn't sound pleasing to them. So as a parent, I think this is really important for me as well.
Okay, I think the first thing that parents ought to realize and accept is what we call neurodivergence, that all fingers of the hand are not exactly the same. So some way, I think parents need to understand right from a very young age what strengths their children have, what the challenges they have, and how to support these. Very often, parents put their own expectations of what they wanted to do and couldn't achieve on children. That's important not to do, but allow the child, nurture the child. Of course, stimulate the child in all ways, but invariably the children will kind of tell you as you grow along how, what are their strengths and what are their weaknesses and what direction they may wish to go in. So not to straitjacket a child, to recognize oranges and apples and really see their different aptitudes is also very important. Working with teachers in schools and trying to see how the child can be helped if the child has certain challenges is important. Focusing on physical activity, as I said, good sleep, etc. And of course, not to be comparative. I mean, to get the child to set goals and standards, ambitions, etc., but not to invariably be in competition with others. Competition can be healthy up to a point, but beyond a point, it can become difficult for the child to cope with. So some of these are simple strategies that parents may wish to adopt to make sure and to make the child feel wanted. I mean, sometimes the child feels very rejected when the performance is not to par. And I think that's not a very healthy way to get the child to be more, to kind of focus on doing better. So there are important supportive strategies to, of course, may inspire the child to do better, but not to make the child feel completely lacking in self-confidence and to feel a failure. That's very important.
Yeah, to ensure to motivate them. And I think what you said about, competition, of course, healthy competition and comparison, I think these are the toughest on children. Moving on, we have a lot of viewer questions, Dr. Murthy, but I would like to ask you, how do we fight the immense stigma associated with mental health? Are there some successful case studies that we can learn from, since this involves changing people's perceptions or even beliefs for that matter of fact?
Yeah, I think stigma is one of the biggest issues when it comes to talking about mental disorder. And that's true right across the spectrum. Even the most educated people, even the most affluent people, even the people who are professional people, there's a lot of stigma associated with mental illness. It's very easy to say I have a headache or I have a chest pain. It's very difficult to say I'm feeling anxious, I'm feeling low. So therefore, I think talking more about psychological distress becomes very important. The second thing is this thing that, while we can't control other bodily function, as far as our mind is concerned, we have to be 100% in control 100% of the time. That's again a myth. The third thing is, of course, if I talk to a professional or get professional help, it means I'm weak. There's nothing, no association between weakness and having a mental health problem or a mental health disorder. So these are very common things that people, misconceive about mental health, and therefore it becomes very important to be able to talk about it. The second thing is, of course, to know where to access and how to access mental health services. That's also very important because, very often may not be available within reach. People may not know whom to contact. People are very worried about confidentiality. But I think everyone needs to know that professional services invariably are confidential.
Yeah.
They do, help you to kind of get over it. And as I mentioned before, I think understanding that, talking to somebody, getting the right kind of counseling, the right kind of medication also, which is available now for a variety of psychological mental health disorders. I think understanding what's available, there are medicines, there are physical treatments, there are psychotherapies and counseling that's available. So understanding that help is available, and you can actually reduce the time of suffering by taking help on time is very critical as well. The Tele MANAS program was initiated on 10th October, which is World Mental Health Day, as you know, last year.
Yes, I was coming to that,
yes.
Including, I think there are 23 tele mental health centers, and how much progress, if you can also tell us about that.
Yeah. So basically the Tele MANAS program looks at setting up Tele MANAS cells in every state and union territory, because the mental health is not very equitably available in all parts of the country. So here a trained counselor will talk to the individual. The individual has to call 14416, and the counselor will listen to them, will try and address their problems, will try and support them, also identify what problems need to be seen by a mental health professional within the Tele MANAS cell, or maybe wherever it's available. So it seeks to network all the available resources, including the district mental health program. We've had more than 3 lakh callers to the Tele MANAS, and problems from sleep disturbances, feeling low, feeling anxious, worries about academic performance, interpersonal relationships, and of course, other behavioral problems, substance use, and the entire gamut of problems that people have come with. So I think it's given people an opportunity to talk about these.
Dr. Murthy, Ojal is asking how to know the difference between stress and depression. When is the right time to seek help? So I think a lot of people would want to know, because, how does one really differentiate?
Yeah. So I always say that, when a person is stressed, it's like being in a pressure cooker, having a lot of thoughts and feelings really bubbling up and down and, leaving off a lot of steam. The only way for that pressure cooker not to burst with all these thoughts is that it has a valve. Similarly, I think we also have a valve, which is our ability to express ourselves or to talk. And it's very important to share when one is feeling stressed. It's important to do some of the things I talked about earlier. It's also important to learn how to solve problems. There are simple strategies on problem solving and coping with situations. But if you find that the stress is overwhelming, you've had a life event which is very, very traumatic, if you're not sleeping at all, for a week or more, you're feeling low all the time, having negative thoughts, feeling helpless and hopeless, your sleep and appetite and your weight have come down, don't wait. Check it out with somebody. And, as I said, call a helpline, get in touch with a professional, especially when there are severe biological disturbances like sleep, appetite, and weight. There is there are these feelings of low mood, not able to enjoy any kind of pleasurable activity which you could enjoy before, or you have a family history of proneness to depression, etc. It's always safer. You're using substances in excess. It's always safer to seek some professional help.
I think right timely action is what is important, especially when it comes to, of course, mental well-being. We'll just take the last two questions. We have Tinkesh wants to know, he's asking you if you could give some tips to manage stress during exam and also not let it affect your mental health. And also Sonali has a similar question, so I'll just club these two. How do you deal with stress of assignments, internships, and building a career path? How does one stay motivated?
Okay. The first thing about stress is that there's a law saying if there's no stress or too much stress, there is a problem in performance. So not at all being stressed about something is also a problem, because then your motivation comes down, your drive comes down. But having too much stress is also not at all productive. So really being able, the other second thing is that you need to break down what you need to do into smaller parts so that it doesn't appear unsurmountable, which means whether it's an assignment, etc., time management is very critical. Planning and prioritizing what you need to do is also very important. Breaking down that entire thing into smaller manageable segments is very important. Preparation well in advance is very important. Getting support and getting feedback on what you're doing is very important. Learning for yourself what are your strategies that are very good to achieve it. What are the times, what are the things that are not so good? For example, do you tend to procrastinate and leave it till the last minute? Or do you kind of break it up? What kind of help can you get to do this? Are all very, very critical in planning to do a particular task. Taking breaks perhaps in between and not, kind of getting exhausted, just before D-Day is also very critical. So people say that just before these examinations, etc., getting the right amount of sleep, eating well are very simple but important strategies to be able to do well.
I think you've put that really well. Thank you, Dr. Murthy, for sharing insights with us. And I'm sure it'll help our viewers and listeners. If you have any more questions or there are any questions that we've not covered, please put them in the comment section. And for our viewers, we'll definitely get back to you. Thank you so much for watching. And once again, Dr. Murthy, thank you so much for giving us your time and sharing all your insights. Thank you so much.
Thank you very much. And let me wish everybody good health and happiness.
Thank you for giving us your time.